Going back to what you said about your experience watching this documentary, before we even dive into your childhood, when
Yeah.
you say it made you cry a couple of times, what did cause you to feel that emotion?
Um, I think one of the things was kind of reliving Bill Gothard's teaching on how to raise your kids and how to discipline your kids. So there was this book that he endorsed that was very much a part of that culture that almost every parent in that world used, which was called To Train Up a Child. And the idea behind it was that you're essentially the phrase that was often used was that you have to break the will of your child, and you're almost like breaking them like an animal or a
Mhm.
horse. And so you start with infancy, and you train your child like to. They called it blanket training. So they would put a baby on a blanket, and they would put the baby's favorite toy nearby, and if the baby reaches for the toy, you're supposed to smack the baby, and you keep doing that until the baby no longer reaches for the toy, and you're essentially conditioning this child to respond to pain and to input like an animal. And it sounds, I mean, it is horrific, but you'd be shocked by how many parents did this. I mean, um, it was everywhere. I mean, and again, in this world, in my little section of the world, it felt mainstream. Like it didn't feel weird because everyone did it. Um, and I think it kind of turns your parents. One of the things that's emphasized is that discipline has to be, it has to be a loving thing. You can't do it in anger. It has to be a time of correction, and you bring scripture into it, and um, and that part is, in some ways, that's good, but there was this idea of like you spank for everything and you're conditioning your child to respond to pain, but then you introduce scripture into it and like you hug at the end, and it creates this really weird uh dynamic where you're being abused, but your parent is telling you "I love you" while they're abusing you, and then that you hug at the end, and then there's scripture, involved, and so like scripture, you end up with this really weird association with scripture, where I'm one of six, and I have siblings who are no longer in the faith, and they'll tell you that they'll hear certain verses and they're triggered just by hearing a verse of scripture because they associate it with that past. And so it's yeah, watching that and kind of remembering those days was very overwhelming.